This fourth and last PowerPoint about race and racism is about two different ideologies that basically have the same goal, and this is to end racial discrimination. But these two ideologies use different strategies, and we'll see them here. The first one is called the colorblind ideology, and it's very simple. It is giving equal treatment to everyone, no matter what is their racial background. So when we select individuals to be hired or chosen for any position or role or anything in society, we should ideally not know about their racial background. According to this ideology, the best way to end discrimination is by treating everyone equally. So this ideology focuses on individual skills rather than group membership. So it says again that one should not pay attention to race. Race should be avoided as a topic, avoided as a notion. So it's preferable not to see races, not to know about races at all. This ideology was precisely the goal of the civil rights movements in the United States in the 1960s, to establish race-blind standards. And it was what Martin Luther King was describing in his famous speech, I Have a Dream. The colorblind ideology is a laudable goal, and honestly, it was the only goal African Americans could afford dreaming of in the 1960s. They could not ask for more at the time. It's okay. It focuses on commonalities. It focuses on, we're all human beings. Let's not focus on the differences between us. But the colorblind ideology has been criticized recently a lot because, first, it implies a reality, a social reality in North America and everywhere in the world that does not exist. It would be great in a post-racial world, but we do not live in a post-racial world. So we do not live in a post-racial world, and we do not live in a post-racial America. I will focus on North America here. Even if we say that overt racism is not so much present around anymore, people are ashamed to be blatantly racist. Even if we say that official legal segregation does not exist anymore, which is true, segregation is still there around us in our daily lives. And I'm talking about serious segregation here. The pictures you see here are from Baltimore. I use this example because I've been living there for 2 years. And this city is interesting. Well, interesting. It's a good example of racial inequalities where black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods coexist side by side. It's not like a white core and a black margin. It's a checkerboard. You cross one street and you change the color of the neighborhood, and it's there. It's in your face. Pictures here show a poor African American neighborhood where you see abandoned row houses. Typically, the one at the corner is still in operation officially. It's a small business usually. It's a barber shop, as you see here, or a convenience store, or a clothing store, a liquor store. But the rest of the houses, you might think they are not occupied, but they are. They are occupied by families, even if they are ruined. So that's an example of segregation. Black families live there, okay, and don't think there's a good school around for kids. There is a school, but who's going to teach there? No one wants to go teach in these schools. So it's a very, very difficult daily life for families. And this is the example, one striking example from United States, from Baltimore, but it's not the only city where this exists. So segregation is there around us in 2020. So we might say that we are better than that in Canada, but our First Nations here do not live in ideal conditions a lot of times. The picture you see here is Atewapiskat. This is um, it's a native community, and people live there without proper housing, without clean drinking water. So the reality is not so much better in Canada for some communities. So post-racial world here, not a reality. So let's come back to the criticisms of the colorblind ideology, claiming that we should not see races, we should not consider races in any of our choices in life, kind of implies that there's something problematic about races, about different racial realities, about racial diversity. And even if we claim that we should not see race, that all race does not exist, we're all humans, okay, races are not meaningful in biology, but they are extremely meaningful in society. They are a major component of everyone's self-definition. Who you are is based on many things, including your racial background and your cultural background that goes with it very often. So claiming that we should not pay attention on racial differences makes racial differences a problem, and whereas it's not a problem. It also would create a society that ignores, and this is the major criticism of the colorblind ideology, it creates a society that ignores negative experiences that are lived with people from different racial backgrounds. And these individuals suffer to different degrees in their daily lives. The colorblind ideology is criticized because it has no awareness of today's systemic racism that is everywhere around us, today's microaggressions that are daily, and white privilege. Now we'll see these three notions one by one with you, so you can consider how the colorblind ideology has been criticized a lot because it ignores these three notions that are present in everyone's lives if they are not white. I will start with microaggressions. Microaggressions are little things done by members of the majority. And here I'm talking about racial microaggressions. So I'm talking about the racial majority. They're little things said and done by white people to people from other racial backgrounds in their everyday lives that send very subtle messages, but denigrating messages to other individuals. Microaggressions are very tricky to identify because they are not done intentionally. They're done by people who do not consider themselves as racist individuals. They're done unintentionally by people who don't think or don't think enough before doing or saying something, or are not sensitive enough. I'm sure I am doing sometimes microaggressions without realizing it, even if I absolutely do not consider myself as a racist person. But I am a member of the majority, and I'm sure it happens to me. It happens to everyone. And it's the accumulation of many microaggressions day after day that is so it's damaging for people. They're tricky to identify also because they exist because of a question of perception. What makes them microaggressions, these little things done and said? It's how people perceive them. It's not their nature, it's how they hurt people. They're defined by those who receive these denigrating messages. I will give you a few examples. In 2008, when Obama was running to be president for the first time, his vice president was Biden at the time. And Biden said at one point in his speech that Obama was good looking and bright and articulate, he said. That was a microaggression, as if only white people could be good looking, bright, and articulate. And it was done by the future vice president speaking about his hero, his someone very important for him. So imagine if you say something like that about the person that is very important for you, you can say things, microaggressions to everyone from minority groups. And other examples, saying someone, where are you from? When someone's not white, the person might really well be born here. Uh, saying someone, oh, you look so good here for an Asian girl, as if Asian girls do not look good in general. Huh? Saying a teacher being really surprised that a student is the best student in the class, but not white, or an immigrant student. As if only white students could be the best. Huh? So these are examples of microaggressions. Sometimes they are done as a compliment, but they're not compliments at all if you put these things in context. And very important, I repeat, microaggressions are not intentional. This is what make them so hard to stop, and that's what's make people so unaware of the harm they're doing sometimes. White privilege is something else, and it's also something very tricky because you are only aware generally of white privilege when you're not white. White people we have a lot of difficulties seeing sometimes how privileged we are in society because we were born white and raised as members of the majority in our country. But white privilege is something that is everywhere around us, that is part of everyone's lives. And we kind of have to realize it. And the tricky thing about white privilege as well is we cannot, as we do with microaggressions, say really we have to stop that. We have to stop trying. We have to stop making microaggressions. But we can't really say stop white privilege because the real definition now in 2020 of white privilege is a question of demography. There is a racial majority. That's it. So it cannot be stopped. We cannot change the demography. Gatineau is 75% white, 25% visible minority. This is a statistic that comes from the census of 2016, Statistics Canada. So white people are majority in our city, in our country, and this gives them what we call white privilege. White privilege today is not the same thing as it was until the 1700s. At the time, white privilege meant you have the right to own a gun, own land, and beat up non-white people without suffering any consequences. So white privilege is not that today, and I will explain exactly what it is. But the tricky thing, white people have to realize that they are privileged in society. Once white citizens realize that, how privileged they are, and how members of the minorities are less privileged for many reasons, then microaggressions and systemic racism will be able to stop somehow. White privilege exists in three levels. First, in little things of daily life. It's not very important matters, little things of daily life. But it still sucks for people sometimes who are not members of the majority. I put the picture here of Band-Aid. They're white collar. This is a little thing that might be not fun for members of racial minorities. If you're white, you do not have to go to some specific alleys at the pharmacy to find your shampoo or cosmetics, or you don't hear something when you go to the um, oh, what's the word in English? The person who cut your hair. Huh? Oh, I don't do your hair. You're not white. Huh? You hear that. You hear these things if you're not white. You cannot go everywhere you want to have your hair done or to buy cosmetics for yourself. That's these are little things, but they suck when you really think about it when it happens in your daily life. Huh? So that's the first level, little things, white privilege. Then it also is at other levels, important matters of life, even worldviews, and I will explain that. White privilege is also linked with important matters of life. Important example, if you're white, you do not suffer from negative stereotypes in your daily life. How you can borrow money, how you can dress, and how you can do at school. There's no negative stereotypes on you there. People, if I'm white, people don't think I got my job because of certain quota to fill out. Huh? They assume I got my job because I deserve my job. That's my white privilege. If I'm not white, people will always have second thoughts about how I got my job. White people are well represented in TV shows and movies and textbooks and media in general. For a few years now, during the um, Oscar ceremony, members of racial minorities are protesting a lot because they might be well represented in movies, but they're not nominated. So there is systemic racism there. There's white privilege. A good example and funny one was in Gatineau last year. The Mountain Equipment Co-op flyer, this is a picture on the right, showed exclusively 100% white people in it. As we know, one person on four in the city is not white, as if only white people have healthy life habits and work out. And going along with that, a survey was done among citizens of Gatineau. And those who did the survey found out that actually people from minorities have healthier life habits than white people. So the representation in the flyer was totally biased here. So this is important things of life. How you look, your image, the image of your race is not the same if you're white or if you are not. Another example, when I was living in New York, I was living with a Jamaican woman, and her 7-year-old son was 7 at the time. And one day, the boy did something wrong at school. I don't know what he did wrong, but I've heard a conversation during that evening between mom and son, and she told him, "You are black in the United States of America, first strike. Then you did something bad at school, second strike. Be careful, boy, because you have to be better than your white friends to be considered equal at school." That is very sad to hear. And she said it like that. First strike, you're black. A white kid would not have this first strike. The bad thing he did at school would be the first strike. So that's a conversation a white boy would not have. So this is another example of the daily life white privilege. Other examples of important matters in white privilege. Uh, you have more chances to be born in a wealthy family in North America if you're white because of your background. Probably your boss is white, because important positions are occupied much more by white people. So you look at us here at the college, and the director general is white. Most teachers are. Political leaders are white most of the time. Look at these four pictures here. These were the choices you had during the last Quebec elections last year. So there is gender diversity here, there is gender identity diversity, but there's no racial diversity. Look at white they are. So this is other examples of white privilege. And white privilege also operates at even higher levels in how people see the world as a whole. The world got, between brackets here, developed, civilized by white people. I explained last year in anthropology very clearly that that was an accident of biology and history, that Europeans conquered the world and not the opposite. It was a question of resources, a question of how they have developed farming. It was an accident, not because they were smarter, but the result is the same. Europeans conquered other continents. And a lot of older people, especially older generations, still see it as a sign of intelligence. White people civilized other continents. And this idea, this worldview, has a very long life and is not about to die soon. So white privilege is everywhere around us. Uh, it's not like microaggressions. It's really hard to make efforts to stop it because it's a question of demography. But at least white citizens should be aware of this privilege. Only if we are aware of the privilege we have in daily life, in important matters, then we can be sensitive to the reality of other people. Systemic racism is the third form of inequality that is ignored by the colorblind ideology. Systemic racism means that there are a lot of racial inequalities in society that are totally rooted in the social structure. It's not about individual behaviors, it's about laws and policies and practices in the broader society. Systemic racism leads to a lot of inequalities, of strong inequalities in education, housing, employment, and all spheres of life. I said already, example, that 25% of the population of Gatineau is a member of a visible minority. So it's 1 on 4. Look at the picture here. These are all the teachers of Heritage College a year ago, last fall. Look at our color here. We're not 25% minority at all. No one in the college has said or even thought, oh, we have to hire white teachers. We should not hire members of visible minorities. Absolutely not. Even it's the opposite. In the department here, when we hired a second anthropologist, we really wanted someone from a visible minority, actually. It didn't happen. It's not about individual racism. It's not even about individual feelings. It's about how the society is structured. It's the society that explains why despite of the 25% of the population here being a visible minority member, and here what you see on the picture is there's a big difference. It's because of systemic racism. To be a teacher at Heritage College, you need a master's degree. And even with a master's degree, it is really hard to get a job in a cégep now. There's a lot of competition, especially in social science and in anything else than engineering and career. You need a PhD most of the time to be a faculty member here. This is what is asked as a diploma. You have much more chances of having a PhD if you're white. Not because you're smarter, not at all, because to get a PhD, you need resources. You need to be in school during a long time. So you need not necessarily being from a wealthy family, but to have a family that is wealthy enough that can afford having you in school until you're 30 years old and not participating financially to your own well-being. So that's tricky. It's money. Even if education is cheap in the Quebec province, it is expensive to be a PhD candidate during 3, 4, 5 years. Huh? And the white population is wealthier. This is another part of the systemic racism. So the wheel is turning. If you're white, you have more chances of having a good job in a good institution. Not because people who hire you are racist, because the whole society is not giving you the same opportunities if you're not white. It's deeply rooted in how the society works. So even if it's not about individual attitude, it's not because people are racist as individuals that the society as a whole is not. The society is racist, and this is systemic racism. It is very hard to admit for members of the majority if we say that their society, their country, their province is racist. It's a system here. White people will feel insulted to hear that because they are not racist. They do not consider themselves racist. Some of my students were talking about the guilt that they should not have. And it's true. White people should not feel guilty, but should acknowledge that there is systemic racism. It's not feeling guilty, it's admitting there's a problem in society. And this is hard to admit. It's a debate now in the politics of the province. People, leaders, do not want to admit the systemic racism around them. And this is another example here on the picture. It's Hall's, I think it's a Pee Wee hockey team. They're all white. Huh? Not because the coach or the league said only white kids are allowed. Of course not. But playing hockey is very expensive because you go to tournaments and then you grow up every year. You need new equipment, and oh boy, especially for the goaltenders, that's crazy expensive. And mostly white families can afford playing hockey more than non-white families because of systemic racism. So this is all part of the same system. White kids, white employees have more privileges than other ones. And this is extremely hard to stop in a global society because it is rooted in how it works. So to end systemic racism, which is a big task, it's not the personal attitudes that have to change because they are already okay. People are not personally, openly racist. They do not do in their daily life voluntary racist acts or or thoughts. But to fix systemic racism, the whole society has to change. And this is a much bigger task than individual change, and it will be much slower. The alternative ideology to the colorblind ideology is called multiculturalism. This is to give attention to racial differences. Not by asking a person where are you from, huh? But by learning about racial inequalities. So when you learn about racial inequalities, then you are better equipped to help reducing them. So this is learning about the realities of other people. Learning about daily life suffering, learning about why African Americans or other racial groups are disadvantaged today, even if they are as smart as everyone else. So there are reasons for that. There are historic reasons. So people should learn about it. This is part of multiculturalism. Only when you understand and you are informed about the realities of people from other racial backgrounds, then you can make a difference in society. Then the negative attitudes and the systemic racism can be reduced. And we live in a very interesting period right now because there is something going on with the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States and here in Canada as well. Because for the first time, white citizens start to be interested in speaking up about their Black friends or friends from other races. So this did not happen before. It was really a racial movement now it's becoming a global movement. So we feel a will by the white population to be informed and to be knowledgeable about what's happening to other people. And this starts by admitting that racial inequalities are there. They still exist. It's not because there was a black president in the United States a few years ago that magically racial inequalities have disappeared. It's not because we have a good immigration policy in Canada or better than other places, then racial inequalities do not exist. It starts by admitting that there are a lot of racial inequalities and there is systemic racism around. That not only bad people are racist, but the whole society is, even if people don't want to admit it. The whole society is racist. Racism is structural. It's not an individual problem anymore. It is a structural problem. And when once people admit that, which is the core of multiculturalism, things will change. So this is why in 2020, the colorblind ideology is not so well accepted, especially from by members of the visible minorities. It is because it's considered as a form of microaggression. It does not take into account the daily suffering people have because of microaggressions, because of white privilege, because of systemic racism. This is why now multiculturalism is a point of view that is more accepted socially, to acknowledge that other people suffer more than us, and then we can do something about it.